welcome back, everyone. This is Chase, and joining me today is Jack Kirkham, president and owner of Kirkham's Outdoor Products. And I should say, AAA tent and awning, the Springbar tent. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate you taking some time to be here. This is especially fun for me. I mentioned this to you off air, but a lot of the conversations that we've had doing these oral histories, they're about companies outside of Utah. And I've had some great interactions with products, some of the products from some of these outdoor brands, but I feel especially an attachment to Springbar. And I told you a little bit off air, I was able to see my dad the other day, and he got his first tent in the early 70s when he was 14. His dad bought him a Springbar tent, and it was the Scouter. And we were able to set that up together the other day, as well as another Springbar that he got in the 90s that I slept in, going camping all the time. And so I have this attachment to Springbar tents, and it's kind of fun to see the print on the Scouter, the older model that still has AAA tent and awning printed on it. And we'll kind of get into the history of the company, but sure. It's fun for me to be able to talk to you about these products that I have an attachment to, and especially Kirkham's and AAA tent and awning, and Springbar, all of these names kind of as one company, being really one of the oldest outdoor companies in the state. I think Browning holds that, right? Browning's kind of the oldest.
Probably, yeah.
But more on the firearm side, right? But I would have to say that AAA or Kirkham's is the oldest kind of traditional outdoor brand in the state. Is that safe to say?
I think that is safe to say. I mean, because any of the others, around the time of AAA, there could have somebody like Wolf Sporting Goods, but very, very largely hunt and fish, and not really, I don't see the very handful of companies maybe back in the 50s that were around. Probably, I wouldn't see those as outdoor companies, more like I said, hunt and fish. So
right, yeah, and more retailers, right? Not making their own products necessarily.
Oh yeah. No, as far as manufacturing, we definitely would be the oldest, I think.
Right. Well, and for you, we're going to get into the history, but you're part of this larger family legacy. How does that feel to be part of a family legacy, of outdoor product makers? We'll get into that question. Maybe that's a good place to kind of wrap up the conversation. But
no problem. Sure.
Maybe we can peel back the curtain a little bit and go back in time, 1944. So Arthur Jack Kirkham purchases AAA tent and awning in downtown Salt Lake City.
Right.
But, can you tell us a little bit about Arthur, his background, how he got into, what led him to this decision of buying a tent and awning company in Salt Lake?
Yeah. Who would do that?
Yeah.
And so Arthur Jack Kirkham, was my dad. For the record, he went by Jack. So,
yeah.
So anybody could refer to him as Jack. If he used to joke around, if somebody called and asked for Arthur, like, don't ever take the call because they don't know me.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But I would say that, trying to be as concise as I can, my dad just always had an interest in art, in drafting. He liked he liked laying things out. He liked from his high school days, he liked anything art related. And so that was just kind of a genetic thing, I guess. And when he was a teenager, I believe it was his uncle, had a tent and awning company. It wasn't AAA. It was actually a different company called Spear Tent and Awning Company. And when my dad was a teenager, he got a job, I think, for a couple of summers hanging awnings for his uncle at the Spear Tent and Awning Company. And I'm pretty, and so I think that he got really attached to the idea of making something and taking it to the finish line, So that was a little bit of a background. I don't believe the spear tent and awning was around for too long. And then when my dad was not a lot older, when the war came on, he had some physical issues, so he wasn't able to like go on the front lines, but he went to work at a naval shipyard as a draftsman, and started doing mechanical drawings and fairly sophisticated drafting work in the shipyard. And he was just fascinated by how the pieces and the parts fit together of the whole thing. And after the war, he came back to Salt Lake, and I think he just randomly saw that there was some guy selling AAA tent and awning company, and he remembered the awning business, and they had a few sewing machines, and I don't know, he was just taken by the idea of taking a piece of fabric, cutting it up and making it into something, and then finishing it. I just think he loved the idea, just that feeling of fulfillment. And so he made the guy an offer on the business. I think he bought it for $5,000, as far from what I recall. And he used to joke that he was so wet behind the ears, really didn't know anything to speak of. He used to joke that he thought the guy was really selling it so he could buy it back at a cheaper price, because he thought my dad would just totally fail, but he didn't. So anyway, that's kind of the start of it.
How old was your dad at that time to be buying a company like this?
Well, let's see. That's a great question. I don't know. He was probably maybe like 30 years old, something like that.
Okay. Yeah.
Pretty young.
Where did he learn how to do this drafting? Did he go to some kind of formal? Did he have some formal education and to pick up that skill? Or
I think he took a couple classes in high school. He never went to college. Took a couple classes in high school, and then he bought books, and mostly self-taught. He was a smart guy.
Well, it seems like school at that time, there was a lot of focus on like the technical education, right? Like learning these hands-on skills still at that time, right?
I think there was a lot more of that, and so I think it was pretty much in high school and self-taught, and then I know even from the stuff I have from his estate, he had a bunch of books about how to do drafting and how to do mechanical drawing and architectural stuff. So he had a real interest in all that.
Well, what was what was the state of, well, I guess before we get into the outdoor business, I guess when he was buying this company, do you happen to know if his intention was to just keep making, I'm assuming, more commercial awnings? Was this more for businesses that needed an awning in front of their house? What kind of products were they making?
Well, awnings were actually, a pretty substantial part of the business at the time, and it was probably kind of a split between commercial and residential, and honestly, a lot of the a lot of the requirement for awnings was just really because there wasn't air conditioning, at the time. So that's, nowadays, awnings are, they're commercial, they're kind of design driven. Nobody needs them to cool a building down, but so it was really driven by, just like keeping the sun off the windows. And I know one of his first big jobs was, and I don't know what they call it now, but it was called the Hotel Utah. And pretty substantial thing at the time. I don't know. I think it was, maybe 12, 13, 14 story building. And I don't know, he did like, like 50, 60 awnings just for all the individual windows on the rooms. So other products were really more kind of almost agricultural, I mean, there was a lot of business from, like cattle people, sheep herders, and a lot of those, a lot of the business was for, a lot of it was for, like wall tents, the big traditional white wall tents, and what they used to call, sheep herder tents, which was kind of a teepee style, like a pyramid tent, and then sold a lot of tarps, because a lot of the trucks at that time weren't enclosed, and so they used to sell a lot of tarps just for truckers to, throw over their loads. So it was kind of that, and I think his desire at the time, I think he just wanted to, like stay in business, not go broke, and he enjoyed it doing a lot. I don't know if he had a long-term vision at the time, to be honest. He just liked doing it.
Yeah, that was kind of my next question is, did he have a passion for the outdoors, or did he have a connection to that, or did he was just more interested in the challenge of the product itself, and then the company naturally evolved into more of an outdoor business?
I think what you just said, the latter. I think he was really kind of fascinated by working with fabrics, and again, taking something from start to finish, improving products. I think I don't think he had an outdoor passion maybe the same way I always have, because to him, coming from the Depression, a lot of people didn't really want to go camping. I mean, they wanted to like have a house, that was comfortable, and maybe a refrigerator,
Right. Yeah.
and and so camping was not always, really a glamorous thing to a lot of people. So I
Right.
think he first liked the products, then he liked the business. Um, After that kind of, after a period of time, he came to, own a decent sized little piece of property up by the Woodland area, with where we had, like a summer home. And he spent a lot of time up and being outdoors. He did like to fish a little bit. So he did love the outdoors, but I don't think in maybe the same way that, kind of the outdoor enthusiast did. So,
Right. Well, I wonder if that influences the brand and the product that would develop, right? The tent that we think of, the Springbar, it seems like it kind of grew out of more of a workwear focus, right? It's like you're talking about people who are sheep herders, right? Or people
right.
who are hauling stuff in the back of a truck, or it seems more like workwear rather than, not workwear, but there's more of a focus on work rather than recreation, which I imagine kind of there's a thread there as the company evolves.
It kind of started with the basic products, and then the public began to kind of ask and demand for better things that related to recreation. And my dad he just loved any challenge of doing something better, and frankly making people happy. So
Right. So when did I guess there's kind of a large period of time between 1944 and 61, right, when the spring bar, is invented or launches.
sure.
What are some of the other milestones during that time? What was, was he just kind of, making products, responding to what people needed or were asking for? Are there any other like kind of key steps between the creation of that iconic product and really the company starting?
Well, I mean, the spring bar tent really was definitely kind of a launch. I would say in between that time, he just did a lot of. I think he became known as a person that just did everything probably a little bit better, and put a lot of focus on customers, a lot of focus on quality. One of the inventions that he did that was, I guess, a bit iconic at the time was he invented a thing called the heat return unit, which was basically a sort of a contraption that hooked on the front of like a bulldozer or a caterpillar type thing, and it would bring the heat back to the operator, because a lot of those machines didn't have enclosed cabs at the time. And so he actually invented that and patented that, and sold a whole bunch of them. I mean, and it was kind of out there a little bit as far as anything to do with outdoors or whatever, but it did relate to kind of the commercial industry and the sewing and working with a lot of those customers. So, but I think a lot of it was just kind of just passionately wanting to do just better. And then also, prior to the Springbar tent, I think a recognition that the outdoor industry was going to become something, because right after the war, I mean, people started wanting recreation. And so my dad, started, I mean, it was fairly small, but I mean, he started bringing in, other tent brands, anything that was more of a recreational camping tent, sleeping bags, stoves, things like that. So I think he kind of formed kind of got a foundation of the whole thing going. And again, doing a great job with his customers, everything he did, he was really passionate about quality, doing things well. He was innovative. So, I mean, even if it was like, how do you reinforce a corner and do a great job putting a grommet in? I mean, my dad was the guy that really cared about that stuff.
Right. Well, I guess that's a good question, is when did he start selling outdoor products? And I guess when did Kirkham's, the outdoor retailer, come to be? You had AAA that, was making the tents, making the products.
Yeah,
When
right.
was there the outdoor retailer component? When did that come to be?
Well, I mean, he was selling, as I said, he was selling, outdoor products, I guess you could say, even in the late 40s, 50s, um, you know, prior to the Springbar tent. So he was always doing that. I mean, as far as like really becoming, like specifically an outdoor store, that would probably have started, I guess, with our move to State Street, which would have been, 78, 79,
Okay.
somewhere around there. And that was a conscious thing where, of course, I was working with him. I mean, doing a lot of the stuff really at the time. And, I think we felt like, the awning business was going to be, pretty restrictive and kind of a flat business. It was, I think in its day it was good, but it was pretty tough, getting tough because, really labor intensive and custom. And so we just saw this surge in interest in the outdoor industry. And that's when I was really becoming more involved in the business, and I was seeing a lot of the exciting stuff coming from those companies, like you're saying, in Boulder and, Denver area, probably San Francisco. I was kind of excited about that, the backpacking, all that. And so we decided when we moved in 79, that we were going to have like a big showroom and start carrying that stuff. So, I mean, it definitely was kind of small to start out with, and then, got a lot bigger as time went on.
Do you happen to know what some of the other outdoor brands at the time in Utah could have been? I've told you, I've been really interested in trying to track down, the history is really well documented around other
Sure.
hotspots of gear around the country: Denver, Boulder, Seattle,
Sure.
San Francisco.
Sure.
Utah, sometimes it feels like our history starts in '89 with Black Diamond, right?
Yeah.
And
Right.
that's where, for a lot of people, where I feel like the history starts.
Yeah.
But it should be traced back to Browning in the late 1800s, and then
Sure.
more on the camping side, with you all, right, in 44.
Yeah.
But the
Right.
history is a little fuzzy. It seems like there's
Yeah.
got to be a few companies that fell through the cracks, or the history is not documented. Do you happen to know of other companies, even retailers, that were functioning in those early days, in the 40s, 50s, 60s?
Well, yeah, I really, I mean, honestly, I don't recall any manufacturing companies, back in those days. Utah manufacturing companies. I just don't. I mean, there might have been a little handful here and there, but I mean, they would have been way, way, way small.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it would be more retailers. I mean, the more notable one would have been, there was a company called Wolf's Sporting Goods, which I guess, I guess, I remember they, when we started selling more outdoor related stuff, I think they kind of saw us as being sort of the upstart company, and, like, what are these guys doing? Who do they think they are? So there would have been Wolf's Sporting Goods, and then, of course, like Smith and Edwards, but Smith and Edwards is such a diverse bunch of stuff. I mean,
yeah, and more army surplus, right? Which is where a lot of kind of outdoor
Exactly.
companies started, right?
Right. Yeah. Those are the only two that really come to mind, to be honest with you. And they were both retailers, but as far as an actual manufacturer, man, I don't know. I don't know anybody else.
Yeah.
You might be right. I mean, other than us, it might have been somebody like Black Time.
Interesting. Well, it's something that I'm trying to dig into a little bit more, and
Yeah.
trying to find some of that lost history if it is out there.
I'll do the same if I come across anything.
And some of what I've been digging into is, outdoor brands usually follow the outdoor enthusiasts, right? So I've really been digging into the Wasatch Mountain Club, which has been around for over 100 years, right? The Wasatch Mountain Club was functioning, really 1920s till now. And it
Sure.
seems like a lot of those brands usually follow the people who are up in the mountains and actively playing and getting up there.
Yeah.
And so I've actually been digging through their records a little bit to try to find, okay, is there any mention of someone, from this group who ended up starting a company, right? And it's, there's a lot of records to look through, but I'm still looking. But I think Wolf's is one of the sporting goods stores that pops up, in some of the newsletters that I've read from that group. But so it'll take some digging, but so kind of back to Springbar. Do you know some of the origins of that product, kind of where that idea came from, the unique frame system? Do you know where some of that came from, the inspiration? Or
well, I think and my dad and I, of course, talked about this a lot, but I think the inspiration really came from AAA starting to sell recreational tents. And the recreational tents that were largely available at that time were what we would call a cabin style tent, which would be kind of like 3 ridge poles supported by 6 upright poles, sort of a, kind of a little friendlier version of a traditional wall tent.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's all that was available. And we carried those. And I think the inspiration came from my dad talking to customers who constantly said, these things are really hard to set up. I hate setting these up. They're really a bummer, and it would sure be nice if there was something easier to set up. And, my dad he could not pass anything up like that. He couldn't pass up the challenge. And so according to him, he just kept hearing this. And I mean, it sounds kind of goofy, but I mean, it's almost like, I don't know, I think he processed a lot of this, processed it over, who knows, a year, 2 years, 3 years. And I mean, he said he just kind of literally sat down at a table and drew this picture of an idea. It's like, well, I wonder if this would work, And I mean, kind of as simple as that. So he drew this picture, and then he thought, I think that makes sense. And so he had somebody build one. Now back then, the frame was on the inside of the tent, but it was the same basic idea. I mean, functionally, it worked the same. So he had somebody build one, and I remember he was working with, a factory guy who was with us for probably 60 years. And, I think one other, person at the time. They made the tent and they set it up, and both of them said, well, this thing's really stupid. It's really hard to set up. we don't think you'll ever sell any of these, you know. And my dad was just like, well, yeah, but you know, you have to kind of know the process. You have to explain it to people because it really is easy. You're just going about it the wrong way. So that was the inspiration. He made one tent, and then he was just convinced that we would sell these things. So I think he said on his first run, he made 6 tents. You know, the frames were all handmade, and then he hand sold every one of them. You know, and it just kind of went from there.
So was he sewing a lot of these? Did he have a team that was sewing a lot? How much was he involved in manufacturing? I imagine early days he was doing a lot of it, but at
Oh
what
yeah.
point did he kind of step aside from doing some of that?
Well, my dad was definitely he was a cut and sew guy. You know,
Hmm.
he definitely was. I mean, he was. I mean, honestly, he might have. You know, I don't really even know for sure, but I mean, he very likely could have made the first pattern, cut the first tent, sewed the first tent, made the frame. I mean, he very likely could have or probably did do the whole thing. Um, I would say he stepped away probably after we moved to Fifth South, you know, with a kind of an expanded showroom and wanted to make a thing out of the Springbar brand. And at that time, you know, I mean, in the early days, I think he only had maybe 1 or 2 sewers in that first little shop. But then when we moved to Fifth South, I mean, we had this crazy building with, you know, I think it was an old auto dealership. And so we had way more retail space than we needed. We had offices all over the place and a great big crazy old factory that went in a big L shape all the way from Fifth South over to Main Street, you know.
Hmm.
And so I think he saw the possibilities and started, you know, having a lot of success with the tents. You know, again, not huge numbers, but you know, he would make 6 and then sell them in a couple weeks. It's like, wow, people really want these, you know. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, I think he stepped back when we, you know, mostly when we kind of enlarged that factory footprint, you know, back in the, you know, kind of the early to mid '60s when we moved to Fifth South.
Right. So, what was some of the early response to the tent? Like, I mean, you alluded to some of this, right? Like he's just started to make them, and slowly
Sure.
but surely people started to pick them up. What was the appeal for people? Was it that ease of setting them up? What were some of the features people liked at that time?
Well, people like the ease of setting the tents up, and then the tents, the byproduct of the design was a lot more stability, you know, because the old camping tents really, you know, generally speaking, were not very stable in the wind, or if you made them stable, you know, you had to use a bunch of guy ropes and things like that. So, you know, again, ease of setting up, stability. And then he really, I think he had a much better eye and feel for materials, using nicer materials. You know, I think he was probably one of the first people to use what we would kind of, you know, loosely refer to as a dry finish on a fabric, because a lot of the old tents, a lot of the tents, and some of even probably some of his earlier tents at the time, to make the fabric water repellent, you know, basically a lot of the fabrics were, you know, kind of a loosely woven fabric with, you know, sort of a heavy, like a paraffin based, you know, wax material, you know, sort of like the old military tents. And that was the kind of fabric that was available. And again, I think a big appeal for the Springbar tents when he first kind of got things going was, you know, using a dry finish, using a better quality material that, you know, was, you know, they weren't meant to be backpacking, but they were more compact. They were cleaner. They were just nicer, you know. So
Right. What was the I guess what was the original tent spring bar tent shape? Is it the one that you traditionally think of, or what was that initial? Is it kind of the classic design that we see mostly today?
well, no, the original design really would have been more like your dad's tent, more
Oh,
like
this
that blue
like more
tent.
like the Scouter. Okay.
Yeah, almost exactly like that. You know, just in a variety of sizes. I know that even still with that internal frame, we had a size up to one time that was like 10 feet by 17 feet. So
Wow.
Yeah, but I mean, they look just like that.
Okay.
That's how they looked. And then some people did complain a bit about, having to crawl inside the tent to set it up, even though they were easier than most tents. They were still not ideal. And
Mhm.
that's when he came up with, basically, well, let's take this same concept, the concept of, basically supporting the tent, with these flexible bars, and, like just a single upright on each side. Let's take that to the outside of the tent. And so, that would have been kind of late, I think, late 60s or early 70s. And that's what we stuck with because it was just a lot easier to set up. The stability was still really good. And hope that answered the question.
Yeah, it did. It seems like an interesting time for tents in general, kind of early 60s, moving into the 70s, and even maybe a little bit before that. In some of our other conversations, we've talked about the companies like, well, like Warm Light, Jack
Mm-hmm.
Stevenson's Warm Light, right? And the innovations that he was bringing to tent design, and largely
Sure.
tents, more of the backpacking mountain tents up until that point, right, were
Sure.
more the A-frame.
Mm-hmm.
And a Jack Stevenson came in and started to bring aerodynamics from his background in engineering. He started to make a more aerodynamic tent
Sure.
and brought arches, right, and more flexible
Mm-hmm.
poles and
Yeah,
um,
like moss tents, if
right,
you've
yeah,
studied,
moss. Um,
right?
so it seems like an interesting time in general where people are starting to get access to materials that allow them to do very different things with tents, right? You don't have to just do the traditional A-frame anymore,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
Is that safe
Right.
to say? Do you feel like materials really played a part in kind of this change in tent structures?
Yeah, I think it was kind of a combination. I agree that the aspect of materials really facilitated that, but there was, for whatever reasons, have to go to your, you know, some other department at the university to figure that out. But I mean, there was this big thing about back to nature. I
Mm.
mean, people, that was driving a lot of recreation. And I think there was just this feeling that, well, if we're going to get back to nature, we have to get far away. And if we have to get far away, it has to be lightweight materials. And if we're going to get far away, we have to make sure these tents don't fall down and they're more comfortable. So I think the back to nature thing, and I mean, really, it was a huge kind of crazed trend. The whole backpacking thing. I think it just really drove so much of that design stuff. It was just rampant, and we started working with a lot of that at Kirkham's AAA. And that's something you wouldn't want to forget in the history because we made and sold a ton of lightweight tents. I mean,
Mm.
and there was definitely a period of time where we probably sold more tents, made out of nylon synthetic materials than canvas materials. So
Mm.
we're kind of part of that whole deal.
Yeah, and how, it sounds like there was definitely a boom there. It seems like we're going to fast forward a little bit. Springbar's kind of come back to its roots, right?
Yeah.
Moving back to the canvas and away from the nylons. And it was kind of funny, I sent you those pictures, right? Of we've got
Right.
the Scouter from the 70s and the nylon. I'm not sure the name of the model from the 90s that we had there. Um,
Yeah. It probably had a number, not a name.
yeah, I've got the model number. I could send that
Yeah.
to you, but
Yeah.
um, interesting to see those side by side. So I guess maybe does that kind of define maybe those next few decades, right? So Springbar comes out, and then the company starts to experiment, right? And you've got the canvas models, but you're also playing with, trying to get into the backpacking space. What are some of the other defining, moments from that time or experiences from that time? Because is that when you started to get more involved? When did you start to get into the business?
Well, I mean, I started working in the business when I was 14 years old. So,
Yeah.
we can do a little math here, but let's say it's over 50 years, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I was the guy pulling for progress, you know, and so I was the guy like right hooked into the, the love generation, the hippies, back to nature. It's like, hey, Dad, we should make these out of lightweight material. Well, I don't know. I don't know about that. Really? You know? Yeah, yeah, we should. And so I think that was kind of a big thing that I was involved in, you know, developing, you know, well, not only the traditional spring bar, you know, frame into lightweight tents, but, you know, I mean, I came up with, you know, a lot of other designs that we sold under the Springbar brand, or the umbrella. I mean, you know, some that would be more, you know, kind of high-end traditional dome tents, and some that would be, you know, considered, I guess, kind of ultralight minimalist tents. And yeah, it was a big part of things, and that probably really, I would say, kind of the heyday of that would have been like maybe 1980 to maybe 95, something like that. Yeah, that was a big part of our business. I mean, and so those two kind of held side by side. The customer bases were, I would say, largely kind of different, you know, for the two, because a lot of people, you know, back then, you know, if you were this one type of person, you know, you used a lightweight tent. That's what you had in your trunk, and you know, just like your dad or your grandpa used a canvas tent. So. Yeah, I don't know. I think I drifted off there with the thought, but
No, that's great.
hopefully that, yeah.
So when you started working with the company, what is it that you did? I mean, you were 14, right?
Right.
Did you just grow up that was just what you knew, right? You just knew that you were a part of this business. What was that kind of for you? Did you embrace that expectation? Was there an expectation that you would become a part of this and grow up in it? How did that feel growing up in that? Whether there was an expectation or not.
I loved growing up in it. I mean, you know, working in a factory, I mean, it was just exciting, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I never really was a sewer, to be honest with you, but uh, you know, my first jobs had a lot to do with like folding and inspecting tents, you know, putting grommets in tarps, you know, things like that. Just doing what we call finishing work in the factory. I loved it. Yeah, I always loved working. I don't think I really had an expectation to come up in the business at that time. In fact, you know, I was probably like a lot of other kids. You know, it's like, well, you don't want to do what your dad does, you know. So I always had this aspiration to maybe be an architect or something like that. And so I think once I really was able to have an influence on things that we were making and selling, and that tied in with my passion for the outdoors, because I really did. I always have. I mean, you know, I remember, you know, was talking to my wife a while back. I mean, when we were, you know, when I was first working at AAA, I mean, you know, sometimes I would spend 120 nights a year in a tent, you know, and I loved it. So, but yeah, did that answer the question?
Yeah, it definitely did.
Yeah.
Maybe share a little bit kind of your journey, you know, different kind of these different roles that you ended up taking, and then, you know, what led you to your current role today. You know, what was that time frame?
Well, I started out, I love to tell people my first job was cleaning the bathrooms. So, which, you know, in the old store on Fifth South probably hadn't been cleaned for a couple of months. So I cleaned the bathrooms, I vacuumed the stairs, and then started working in the factory. Probably worked in the factory, and that was like summer full time, you know. And then I loved it so much I'd go to work with my dad on Saturdays, so I could work like 5 hours in the factory, you know, once a week, and then full time in the summer. So I did that, and then I started on the sales floor probably when I was, you know, like maybe probably 18 years old, actually 17, 18, working on the sales floor, selling stuff, writing up custom orders, for, different things that we made. And then probably, I think about the time I hit 21, everybody said, hey, well, we kind of need a production manager. Like, nobody is like really keeping track of this stuff, or might be good to have somebody like, actually not just, doing the production stuff, but as a manager. So I was a pretty young production manager, at probably age 21. Then we moved to State Street, and State Street, I don't know. I was like kind of like sales manager, production manager, sort of both at this, at that time. I mean, my dad was involved. He likes to joke about, we used to joke about when he said he turned the business over to me, and like his year was a little different than mine, Mine was a lot earlier, but so he wasn't terribly involved in day-to-day stuff, even when we moved over to State Street, because I was kind of running the show. So I was doing factory work, managing the sales force, managing the factory. And I don't know, I really kind of kept doing all that stuff as the business grew. I just, ended up delegating more of that stuff, So for example, the retail team, we finally ended up with, like an actual retail manager, and so, the retail manager would report to me, and then we would have, a production manager who would report to me. So I guess we got a little more like a real business. But I mean, I always, I just always kept a hand in all that stuff. And actually, right up to the time that we moved away from State Street, I was still doing a lot of the buying because I just loved the products and that. So, but then, so I don't know if you know much about the recent history, but Pace and Dwell bought the Springbar brand. They brought the sewing team over here, and I'm kind of on the A team, but I am an employee, So
yeah, maybe share a little bit about when some of that happened. So the company got bought. When did some of that happen, and what was that experience like?
Oh, pretty recent, really. I sold the building on State Street basically about a year ago, almost exactly a year ago. We just it was it was the whole combination, the whole package was just a tough one, from the the competitive side, the overhead, everything. I mean, it was the perfect thing for about 20 years, but with the onset of online sales in particular, and really, I think a lot more businesses getting more focus. I mean, we were kind of I don't know, not the ideal size. We were a little bit too much in the middle, because from the brick and mortar standpoint, you get people like Shields, and where people can walk in and there's a billion of this and a billion of that, and so we couldn't really have the selection maybe on the retail stuff that people wanted, and but the overhead was high, so I just needed to make a change. So so fortunately I sold the building about a year ago, and Pace, and the guys here at Dwell, I think we wrapped up the purchase, of the brand. It was maybe just 6 months or so before that. It was kind of a dicey time, trying to, because I actually wrapped up the deal with them before I even knew I had the building sold. So that was kind of scary, because they bought, the manufacturing and the brand and everything. And so we knew all along that we were going to move, the factory over here. And I just didn't know if I was going to still own a building, and I didn't know what the hell I was going to do if I did. So,
Right. So maybe what's the history of some of the manufacturing? A lot of the product was made in the U.S., sewn in the U.S. I imagine was some of your more nylon backpacking product was that overseas, or was that here in the U.S.? You mentioned some of it coming back. What's some of the timeline of some of the manufacturing history?
Well, so all of the nylon and synthetic tents that we sold were all made in the U.S. We never really, as as I was the owner, as Kirkham's or AAA, we never really got to the point where we were able to do direct importing or anything like that. So, and at the time, I mean, it made perfect sense because like people weren't really doing that,
Right.
back in the 70s or whatever. So
Right.
all of those products were made in the US. We actually made a bunch of other stuff too. We made like day packs, we made some little backpacks, we made we made gaiters, we made, all kinds of little bags and duffel bag, all kinds of stuff. It was all made in the US. And actually a lot of that stuff we continued to make really right up until we moved away from State Street. We continued to do that. But we did stop making the backpacking tents because there just kind of hit that point in time where it was very obvious that, you had to make your tents. You really had to make that product offshore. It just had to be made offshore. I mean, China and some of these other countries they had developed the manufacturing, and they just kind of they just leapfrogged ahead of us, as they have in with shoes and shirts and everything else. So once that became apparent, we just decided, well, let's just keep making the canvas tents because there's still nothing quite like that, and people still wanted them. So we just said, let's take that manufacturing and do canvas tents, and then we still did wall tents and a lot of the bags and things like that. And that's when we started buying those. We just started buying the North Face and Marmot and all those brands and selling them at Kirkham's. So.
Right. So we talked about this as well a little bit offline, but people's interests, especially in the outdoors and well, just in everything, right? Being circular, and what's old becomes new, and
Right.
over and over, right? Have you seen a renewed interest in Springbar product, and what do you attribute that to? Is it the USA made? Is it the kind of the heritage look? Is it a combination? What is it that you think? And has there been a kind of a resurgence in interest in these kinds of products?
I feel like the demand is kind of a continuation and a resurgence because we just can't keep them in stock. I mean, so the desire is very strong. I hate to bring up the COVID word, but I think that's had some impact maybe on some of the recent resurgence, just because I think people just they need to get out, they want to get out, so we have seen a lot of that. As far as the brand goes, I just think that we've been out there for a long time and we've made a lot of people happy, and so I think people. To answer your question, I think there's kind of a trend for people to maybe want to buy less stuff, not buy stuff so often, but maybe buy something that is more lasting, And I don't know what drives that. It's hard to say. Maybe that's just a cyclical thing, but maybe it's the fact that, for so many years, I mean, so much stuff was so disposable, and not to, I won't bring any brands up, but I mean, like companies that, where you can, people, they buy a new wardrobe every month, because they can afford that. But, the stuff shrinks and it doesn't work very well and it's kind of disposable. And so there's been a lot of that out there, or people, you can buy a great big huge dome tent at some place for $99. And I just think people have kind of gone through the cycle of, maybe being kind of frustrated or a little disillusioned by not having good experiences with this stuff. And so I think there is a trend for people to say, you know what, if I want to do this, let's do it so we have a good experience and so we enjoy it. And so I think they kind of think of our brand just because we've kind of been doing that all along, I mean, that's kind of part of the heritage is, I mean, we're not perfect, and I'm sure we've made a few people unhappy, but for the most part, the reputation is that this stuff works. And so I think people now, I think maybe more than ever, want things that work, as opposed to just a thing. And there's always going to be those people, there's going to like, oh man, I have to go camping on this thing and for 3 nights, and they'll go to a discount place and buy a thing that they can sleep in for 3 nights, and then they're done with it. But people just want more than that. So
right. It seems like there's also kind of this inherent, like, underlying sustainability story to the brand too, right? Where it's made in the US, so you're not having to buy something that's, being put on a boat and being shipped over, and but at the same time it's more sustainable because it's going to last longer.
And I think it's really interesting. I mean, we've talked about it a lot, but I mean, I think the aspect of made in USA, it's a little complicated, because I think there's a segment of people, I mean, they probably can't explain it. It's just like, that's what I want, and they maybe can't explain it. I think some people feel like it's better quality if it's made in the USA. And I think, some people feel, they feel that, the sense of, that, like somebody that lives in the US is making this thing. So you're supporting jobs and things like that. It's a bit complicated, but overall, there just seems to be a tremendous interest in it.
Right. Well, if people haven't seen, I'm going to push them to your website, just the springbar.com website. That video that you have playing on there is great, just to see the factory floor that you've got, the sewing floor that you have. It's beautifully shot, and I think it really emphasizes the craftsmanship. I mean, sure. I love seeing the faces of the people that are sewing. Seeing those close-up shots of them doing, these things and putting these products together. I think it really brings back that idea that just this level of craftsmanship, right?
And maybe to a certain extent, just the fact that you're really connecting with somebody. Like, there is somebody like behind that door, like really doing this, and I know who they are, and maybe I have some idea of where they live, and they probably have a family. I think people I think a lot of people like that idea too. So
yeah, no, absolutely. Well, that was really well done. We'll add a link to that in the description for this episode. But where do you see the future? I know the company's been bought. What do you kind of see as the future of Springbar and the company in general moving into the future? I guess what gets you out of bed? What excites you about what's coming next for the company?
Well, hopefully I'll be around here for quite a while, so my plan is to be involved, and I'm involved full time right now. So, I'm not just a guy like, with an office. So I'm very involved in, product development and, the whole production side of things. What do I see? Well, I guess number one, this doesn't sound too exotic, but first and foremost, we just got to try to figure out how to make more stuff, because the demand is just totally outstripping the supply. So a big part of our future will be, to get more sewers and to try to, streamline the production process, see if we can figure out what the bottlenecks are, make things more efficiently, and make more things again to fill the demand. So that's a big thing. We are cautiously working on, some new product ideas. yeah, I don't want to be too specific about them, but I think what we'll do is hopefully I'll be working on new products, and we won't see maybe so many products, but the products that we roll out will be kind of more meaningful, and more, hopefully kind of more iconic. Uh, yeah, that's what I'm seeing.
That's exciting. Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
And then we should mention, you know, Jack passed away in 2008. What do you think? You know, I'm sure you had a lot of conversations with him about the company, the direction. What do you feel like? Did he ever share with you kind of how he felt about the company, about his legacy, about his place in kind of the history of the industry? Maybe not in those terms, but
Yeah,
is there anything that like that you were able to talk with him about?
Oh yeah, I mean, we talked about everything. I think that I mean, he just really wanted to make good stuff. He wanted to make good stuff, and he always wanted to make it better. And he really just passionately cared about people having a good experience. I mean, it just really meant a lot to him, So I think as he got a little bit older and had a chance to maybe drive around a few campgrounds. I mean, if he I remember if they would, wow, we went to this, we went to a campground up in the Uintas, and there were 3 Springbar tents up there. And I mean, I think that was a visceral thing for him. I mean, he just loved the idea that, I made those people happy. They're having a better experience than somebody else. And I mean, that was a real thing to him. And I definitely, I kind of caught that bug.
Yeah, well,
But yeah, and I mean, and kind of an aside to that, I mean, he really, I mean, not to overstate it, or like, I mean, he really cared a lot about his employees. So I think the fact that, I mean, he used to say, probably like a lot of old guys say, like, or like I've said, I never missed a payroll, and always treated people fair, and so that was very important to him. But I think the tent part of it was really just, just making things that worked for people, always, whether it was just some little detail, always improving, always thinking progressively, not just saying, well, yeah, people want these, and so this is good enough. Always thinking ahead, improving, making people happy, and just making good quality.
that's great. That's a
Yeah,
great legacy. You know, and the, a few of those things that you mentioned, like, are felt by people like me who still get to enjoy, even some of the products that were made 50 years ago, right? They're still holding
sure,
up. So he's
they
definitely
are.
kept that promise of making good stuff, right?
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
still kicking. And even though, we had to, have a few things repaired or replaced, they're still
Right,
going
right.
strong, right?
That's right.
Which is great. Well, this has been, I think for me, one of the most fun conversations, just because of the attachment that I have to the brand, to the products.
Thank you.
But any parting thoughts, anything that we missed before we kind of wrap it up?
Oh man, yeah, I think we've covered it. We've covered it pretty
Okay.
well.
Well, I just appreciate you taking time and being willing to share the story. It's such an important company, to not only to the brand or to Utah, but I think to the outdoor industry. So I appreciate you
Thank you.
sharing the
Yeah.
story.
Well, I appreciate it, Chase, and I really appreciate the interest in it. Really do.